Hey, deserving listeners, we have a special guest on the podcast today, Stephan Poulter. He wrote a book called Modern Masculinity. And of course, I wanted to talk with him about what he has written about and what his thoughts are. So, welcome to the podcast, Dr. Stephan Poulter.
Thanks, Kurt. Great to be here with you. Thank you for having me. I know what you do, talking about masculinity and men. So look forward to sharing some ideas with you, hitting the ball back and forth.
Yeah, so to speak, in a masculine fashion, if you will.
There you go.
What sort of reactions are you getting from people upon writing this book?
It's a really good question. Positive for the most part, I think 90%. I think a lot of people are relieved to hear someone's talking about it, like what you're doing, what I'm doing, that we're talking about this. I get a lot of despair, like, oh my God, I need to get this book to my son or my nephew. A lot of young guys under 40 are wondering what to do. So positive results, but I get a lot of despair, like, oh my God, we need to do more of this.
And we're seeing an upsurge in what I would call toxic masculinity, the exaggerated hyper-masculine ideas of Andrew Tate and other kinds of figures like this. What are your thoughts on that?
It's interesting. When I hear the word toxic masculinity, it's the absence of masculinity. It's the absence of a core self-acceptance, humility, empathy, having a plan, and realizing you're something bigger than you. It's the absence of those character qualities. Because masculinity, as you know, is not external. There's no ideal look or bodybuilding, any of that. And also, toxic is excludes people, alienates. Where modern masculinity, compassion is inclusive. People are included. So I see masculinity, some of these guys go off on their ex-wives and stuff like, all you're doing is alienating women or mothers. I mean, it's not helpful.
So what are your thoughts on young men and teenage boys following someone like Andrew Tate? Are you familiar with Andrew Tate?
Very well. I have guys might come to my office and talk to me about it. And I'm like, I go, that's one perspective. I go, it's short term, it's not a long-term perspective. One thing about Andrew Tate, is like any good steak, you cut the fat off and eat the meat. And they're all about taking responsibility for your actions, having boundaries. But when I hear the word man up, that is a showstopper. It's having man up. What does that mean? It's like dealing with your emotions, being responsible. There's so many other words, such a negative connotation. I'm not trying to be, too soft, but I also think of Jordan Peterson, very much down the middle. Guys, you want your wife to appreciate you, take responsibility for your life. Be an adult man, don't be a man-child. Things like that. That to me is really spot on. I think also, Kurt, guys, like they got to fill the vacuum with something, like they got to fill it with something. So he's very appealing, very charismatic. But I tell my clients that it's a short-term solution to a long-term problem. Women, the kind of woman you want isn't a lot of what they're describing. There's a different type of dynamic going on.
So I was perusing your book, and I just wanted to ask you to expand on what you were talking about here. In the beginning, in the introduction, you talk about how there's a debate about whether or not masculinity is outdated or not. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, when I hear that, I cringe because men aren't outdated. How we operate in the world, we need to update our resumes. But masculinity is not outdated any more than femininity or having babies or getting married. None of that's outdated. We just need to update how we interact with that and how we do that. And so when I hear people say masculinity is not relevant, I go, I'm sorry that you've been a victim of some abuse or something where you really have resentment or, male privilege has not been kind. Not that it is ever kind, but it's not outdated. It's impossible. It's part of men. It's who we are. It's our male expression. We call it masculinity.
So in your book, you talk about ways and similar to how I do, where I try to steer masculinity or the associations or pick out the associations with masculinity that are in line with health and making the world a better place. And in your book, it's called Modern Masculinity. So are you proposing in this book a new modern masculinity that is helpful and healthy?
Yes, it's not new. In the sense that what I'm talking about is awareness, because the mind-body connection has always been there, even though we have compartmentalized it for 150 years. The mind-body, like men having heart attacks in their 50s, there's a reason why that's happening at epidemic proportions, because they're not talking. That emotion is going to go somewhere. I'm talking about just trying to normalize it and bring it more mainstream. That getting out a handcuffs where you either be silent or you be angry. Anything else in between, men don't not approved of. That's really in the physical body is it's a sign that something's off many times. I'm not saying all illnesses are emotionally, but there's a lot of times they are living a reckless lifestyle or drugs, and things just aren't working right. There's something going on deeper than just the body. Something else is going on.
So with your clients, what kinds of barriers do you run into as you try to propose other options besides being silent or angry?
I think a lot of times, a lot of guys are addicted to marijuana and they'll smoke it habitually and they'll argue that it's okay. But once a year over the last 10 years, I've had to hospitalize somebody at UCLA Medical for THC induced psychosis. The levels of THC are so high in their body and brain, they have a psychotic break. I find a lot of times guys, once they stop self medicating, then they get to what they're trying to avoid. That's the biggest challenge. What are you avoiding? What are you running from? And you get in the office. Okay, now we can look at it. But I find the biggest obstacle, Kurt, is the self-medicating part. Whether it be work, drugs, exercising, it could be anything. Wide open.
So, helping them to express their emotions in a more healthy way. The major barrier there is the entrenchment of an addiction, which is hard to change overnight, and it requires typically a lot of measures, whether it be daily meetings. You have
You're
to
right.
now suddenly deal with emotions you haven't faced since you started using the substances at the age of 14.
Right.
So that's the major. What other barriers do you see?
I think part of that is normalizing that, help separate the past from the present. Separate resolving your trauma, putting it on the bookshelf, but not letting it continue to run your life in the present, even though you think it's this relationship with this woman that she's doing all this stuff. And really, it predates you by 20 years. You've had these issues in varying degrees throughout the years, and you're looking for someone to heal you. I find that to be a real big bridge that men have to cross. That relationship's not going to heal you. You're going to heal you. Relationship can be supportive, but you got to do the work. It's inside of you.
How did you get to where you're at with masculinity?
I chuckle. A breakup. It got me into therapy in my mid-20s. Broke up with a girl. Oh, I didn't know if the sun was going to come up again. I wasn't suicidal, but I was bereft. And if she heard this right now, she would go, "You were?" And so I thought, I got to do something. So I went to therapy. Nobody I knew went to, but I'm at graduate school. I got to go to therapy. So I go and the guy sits down and he looks at me and goes, "So what brought you in here?" "I want to stop pain. I want to fill this emptiness and stop this pain." He goes, "Okay, it's gonna be a lifetime." I go, "What?" He goes, "It's gonna be a lifetime." And I was with him, I think, every week for 10 years. It really transformed my life. It transformed my life. And William Blake said, what gets men to go to therapy? When our comfort level is here and when despair exceeds it. Can I give you another example, Kurt? Is when guys are going through a divorce. Their wife begs them for years. Come on, go to therapy. Oh, no, it's whatever. I'm not in the feely, touchy stuff, that rainbows and unicorns. Comes home, there's a divorce letter on the kitchen table. He's in my office at 7 a.m. the next morning and doing everything he can to resolve it. But the problem, 90% of the time, it's too late. I tell him, if you're in a relationship, you've got to deal with this part of you because she's not going to, or he's not going to. You got to deal with it. Your partner's not going to carry the suitcase for you.
So did you face those similar barriers when you were in your mid-20s about having emotions?
Yeah. And trying to translate them. Like, what does it mean? Like, what? I'm depressed? I felt like I was illiterate, like emotionally illiterate. That's really what took time, emotionally, meditating, spiritually, all of it together. Finally, I started to recognize what's going on in here. Like I started to be able to read it. It took time, but it was arduous, but I felt better. That was the point.
You talk in your book about evaluating our male role models, which makes a lot of sense, of course. But when I was reading your book, thought about it for myself, and on the surface, it seems like an obvious question and a simple question, but it's really deep.
It really is.
To especially once you have enough life experience to know that the male role models that you had weren't necessarily shared by everybody. There's
right.
There's a lot of variance in the sorts of men, like my dad was a male role model, I would say the primary one,
Mm-hmm.
and Japanese American, and quiet, but strong.
Yeah.
Also, there were these key moments in life where I learned a lot about what it was to be a man. He would kiss us good night when we were
Hmm.
kids. He joked around a lot. He was really funny. He was good with cars and stereos and music, and
Hmm.
you know, made a
Mechanical. Yeah.
was the breadwinner in the family, that kind of stuff. But another important masculine moment was we would go to this. My grandparents had a cabin in the woods on Hayden Lake in Idaho. I don't know if you're familiar, but
Hmm.
that's where the regional KKK headquarters is.
I did
And
not know that. That's
yeah,
new
yeah.
information.
Well, I'm glad you didn't know that.
Yeah.
And we would go there every summer, and we wouldn't go into town very often. But this
Yeah.
one time we're going into town, and my dad telling us that we might run into some KKK members and they might target my dad and us kids because we're supposedly abominations as mixed race kids. Uh, and he said, you know, if dad has to get into a fight, don't worry about it. Like I have it under control. But it was terrifying, you know. But my dad said,
Wow.
don't worry about it because and I'm sure my
I've
dad
got
was
this.
I'm sure my dad was terrified too, you know.
Yeah.
But just that, I don't know how to say it, just that like calm coolness without asking for help. You know, he didn't say, "Hey, maybe I should call some friends," or or
Right.
maybe I
Right.
should talk about how afraid I am or something. You know, that carrying all that weight on your
You know,
shoulders.
you know, absolutely. He took responsibility. He was a leader.
Yeah, which is the good side of things. You know, there's
See,
a good side.
and I think my dad was Australian, so he came to this country and he didn't know America and he had an accent. He would get mocked for his accent at work. And I think my dad always said, son, it's whatever you're feeling, don't let it control you. Don't let it control you. But Kurt, that is frightening because I didn't deal with that level of racism. In the Ku Klux Klan, sure, your dad would have ripped him apart, but that's another story. Because he had that fight inside of him. What's the old saying? It's the fight inside the man's bigger than, more important than how big the man is. But, Kurt, when I talk about feelings and stuff, it's not that we're in the middle, get confronted, you're out with your wife and someone tries to bump and that doesn't mean you don't set a boundary. It's that we're aware of what we're thinking and feeling. That doesn't mean we don't take action. A lot of my guys think, well, if I feel this, I no, no, no. That doesn't exempt you from taking action and being responsible and protecting yourself and also being smart where you're going, what you're doing. Road rage down here in Los Angeles is common. I get guys, well, this guy cut me off. So why are you making it personal? It's not personal, you know. And one guy got pulled over and a guy pulled a gun out a couple of weeks back. And I go, what'd you do? He goes, I just kept the window up and I didn't say a word. Did you drive off? Yeah. He will never honk at somebody again. That's what came out. He was provoking these guys. Not that that's, reasonable a reaction, but that doesn't mean I tell them that modern masculinity is you keep a cool head like your father did. We're going to go into town. I got this. I got this covered. And I guarantee he did. You know that.
I don't remember anyone getting in a fight, so maybe we just got maybe we just got lucky.
Good timing. Yeah. That's a big deal about fighting. Guys and hormones, testosterone. Our job as older men is help civilize these guys, help them get through that stage, kind of get through the Marine part of life, Marine Corps part of life with it. Not everything needs to be settled violently or physically.
The conundrums that I would run into, I didn't know how to articulate when I was younger, but later now I would articulate it as I and all the boys around me were being socialized into this idea that you're either seen by others as a true man, which is a fairly narrow definition, or you're essentially worthless as a human being. It's not that you're just a somewhat non-masculine guy who has another use in society. No, you are just irrelevant. You're nothing. You're either this manly man or you'll never amount to anything. It was one of the most important aspects of signaling to others. And I remember being in that dilemma at times, thinking, okay, in order to align with what's inside of me, what I feel like I'm supposed to do, it would be this violent, angry, unsafe action lifestyle. On the other hand, I don't give a shit about pummeling that guy into the street. Like, what does that, what does that, yeah, even if I win, which God knows, but even if I win, like, what does, how is anyone different? No one is different. Things could go poorly, actually, but there's no benefit. There's no gain. I don't walk away with like $1 million or a career that I always like. Nothing happens other than potentially bad things and just this idea that I have proven myself. But I don't give a fuck what other people think, you know. Of course I did, but I didn't want to. And uh, you know, I was struggling with that. There's this mandate, and then without any kind of counter to that, then you have to throw down. You have to fight. You have to support and defend your honor as a man. Otherwise, you're useless.
Yeah, and that's why I talk about the John Wayne syndrome in introduction, or the Marlboro Man, the dude, or the Duke. No one messed with him. Like he was the top dog, and that's one model. But it handicaps a lot of men because they're not that guy. They're not that guy. There's a lot of other types of guys they can be, and that doesn't mean you're useless. And that's such it's like, guys, if you don't sleep with a lot of women, that means you're not masculine. No, it doesn't. This means you're not promiscuous. There's a big difference. Nothing wrong with sex, but it's when it's used to validate you is when it's problematic. And the John Wayne syndrome, I was a policeman for 8 years, 23 to 31. And they said the guys who get killed have a John Wayne syndrome. What does that mean? Like, they're invincible, they're bulletproof, but they're not. And the guys that did the best usually were most humble. They didn't tell anybody they were the toughest guy in the room. They could handle it, whatever that meant. And I find with initiation, like Robert Bly talks about, you got to leave your mom's courtyard. You got to go out there and plant seeds in the field and deal with yourself and what you want to be in this life. And the John Wayne syndrome is one of many options. It's not the only one. That's why I think there's so much pushback from younger men about that. Or the Marlboro Man, an island unto himself. He rides off alone and he has emphysema. That's not a good model. It's not a good model.
You talk also about whether or not it's true or false that sexual harassment of women or men, random sexual partners, and chronic porn viewing are related to the father and son relationship. You talk a lot about the father and son relationship, and here you're asking the question, is that relationship related to whether or not we will sexually harass others or will watch pornography a lot? Tell me more about your thoughts on that.
A lot of times bullies have one thing in common. They've been bullied at home. And 99% of the time it's by their fathers, and they feel powerless and they take it out and they externalize it and take it out on others. And I find a lot of men are embarrassed to talk about what happened at home growing up. It feels like it emasculates them, or their dad beat them. I can't tell you how many guys I've heard that from. I'm like, what? Dad was a judge. I mean, like, no, but he'd come home. Sometimes you just, give it to us. And what that does for a young man is it's so hard to deal with that trauma or being sexually abused. To get away from those feelings is, they numb out. I'm not talking about pornography ethically or not, or morally, versus it's mind numbing. Any behavior that becomes mind numbing to avoid the trauma with your dad. I tell guys, you got to settle that. You got to settle it. One thing gang members have in common is they tend to be fatherless sons. And that anger about feeling rejected or unloved gets externalized. It gets externalized. And that's what I find with men, the father factor. Whether pornography, a lot of times, it's substitution for not being vulnerable. Like, I have this imaginary relationship, but I'm not vulnerable. And vulnerability is the only way you really connect with somebody intimately. That's why I bring those points up.
So you're saying that, I mean, I'm reading into what you're saying, but if there's a man who is watching a lot of porn and it's harmful to them, they have difficulty with being vulnerable. If they were more vulnerable, they would be expressing needs sexually and emotional needs with partners, and they'd be getting their sexual needs met in person. I think
Yeah.
I'm reading into what
Yeah.
you're saying, but
No, you're reading very well, because it's, you call it sublimation. It's also safe sex, but many times it's in lieu of, it's imaginary. It's when it becomes habitual, and it can take away from your relationship with your partner, almost like a substitution. And that's when it becomes problematic. And it's when it's the purpose with which it's used many times. And I don't want to get on this moral, it's none of that. That's another discussion. But I find with men who have a high porn usage, there's something else going on. There's something covering up. That's the key we try to get to. What's underneath that? Because that's a secondary behavior.
you have a whole chapter on narcissism and masculinity, and the title of it is The Narcissistic Masculine Type. So, what is the narcissistic masculine type?
Kurt, in a few words or a few sentences or less, it's the guy that wants to look perfect, emotionally, physically, financially. Everything's perfect. He's absolutely bulletproof, and it's all about him. There's no feedback loop. All discussions end up towards him. Whatever you're talking about, it goes back to him. He had that experience, and it was even better. Whatever that may mean. And extreme narcissistic men become toxic in that they become abusive, emotionally, mentally, physically. Not every narcissist is abusive physically, but it's all in degrees, Kurt, from 0 to 10. Self-centeredness. I find that is a very common masculinity type for a guy that feels very weak inside, very vulnerable. So they overcompensate with material possessions, cover up with a lot of stuff, because inside there's a scared little boy. And that's the guy I want to talk to. I always tell me about the 7-year-old. Oh, my dad died. Okay. What happened then? And we start talking it through. But I haven't met a narcissistic man, Kurt, who doesn't have some trauma back there.
Yeah, agreed. So, you also have a chapter on shame and men. Tell me about men and shame.
So much for men is we judge ourselves by how well we do professionally, how much money we make. And men are brutal, as you know, towards men, ruthless, to make enough money, esteem, belong to a country club, whatnot. And many times they can accomplish that, but it's outside of them. Shame is this belief and feeling that you're defective, not good enough, damaged goods, no one's going to love you, you're an imposter, scared of intimacy. And shame goes back starts at age 5, where you either feel competent or inferior. And that's where it starts to grow. A little bit of shame doesn't paralyze your life. It's when it starts, that core belief is, I feel like I'm bad. So you try to overcompensate and do a lot of great acts on it. But at the end of the day, it's still outside of you. Like, I can't take medicine for you as much as I may want to, or you may want to do it for me. I've got to do it. And that's what shame requires us to pull it out by the roots. It's faulty beliefs. And I call shame its own chemistry tree. Like, you've got anxiety, depression. Shame is its own diagnostic tree, because sometimes it's anxiety, sometimes it's depression. A lot of times it's just doom, impending doom. Something bad's going to happen, or I'm wrong. I get in trouble. Or guys that come from a family where they got yelled at a lot of shame. It's my fault. I get that a lot more than regardless of age, guys, all ages, 24 and up, yelled at a lot. And if something happens, it's their fault, even though they have no boundary. It's no control. I always call it the 3 C's. Did you cause it? Can you change it? And did you create it?
So, is this book inspired by your work with clients primarily?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I wrote The Shame Factor, came out in 2019, but trying to help men, or really men and women. What's this malaise they feel? This malaise. It's not depression. It's not anxiety, but like, I just don't feel right. And I've dealt with shame for 20 years. I just finally, John Bradshaw wrote the book, Healing Your Inner Child, Set Yourself Free with The Shame Factor. And when I read that, I thought, okay, I got shame. When I was in therapy, we started talking about it. I realized it's much more pervasive than I thought. Like, people, you make me feel bad. You're not bad. We agree with them to feel bad. So that's what got me to write the book, because I wanted to give some, like, okay, this is what it looks like. These are like the 7 cycles. These are the 7 ways it goes, or this, and it can be resolved. You don't have to live with it. It can be healed because it's a learned behavior.
Yeah. We can coast through life thinking that, yeah, I mean, yeah, I got some issues, but it's not that bad. But then when you actually start really evaluating it and you see all the ways in which you're limiting yourself and avoiding and sublimating, you see this huge ball of wax that would be beneficial to dismantle.
So a lot of times women will say to me along that same line, why are men afraid to commit? I go, they're not. They just don't want you to see them. They don't want you to see their shame. And Kurt, I've got guys that make bazillion, whatever, and you would think they've never had a job and they're homeless. The way they deep down feel about themselves, and they go through many marriages. Finally, I say, you got to stop. She's not going to leave you. You got to learn to like you. That's the best relationship you're going to have. Don't worry about loving yourself. Just learn to like him. And that's why a lot of men won't commit, because it's too close. She's going to see. She's going to see maybe I'm a fraud. And I'm not talking about immorality or anything like that, but like that core, that little boy is bad. Like I had a problem growing up reading. I didn't really learn how to read till I was 12. I felt stupid. And doing this book, and they asked me to do the audio book, Kurt, I think it's the first time in my life I almost had a panic attack. Like I perspired like it was 112 degrees in December. I thought, oh my God, all that, my mom, you're not trying hard enough. And here we go. And I realized, okay, we're here. We did the book. We did the audio book. And when I got it back, I cringed when I heard it. Like, no, it's good enough. I've been okay with it. Kurt, that's what we're talking about. That level, we all, on some degree, my parents meant well. I'm not rating my mom, but feeling like you're not enough. I haven't met a guy who doesn't, on some level, okay, I understand that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Dr. Stephan Poulter, thanks for coming on the podcast. Again, the book is called Modern Masculinity, a compassionate guidebook to men's mental health. And
thank you, Kurt.
I think it's an important topic that really everybody should be reading about and wrestling with and talking about.
Kurt, thank you. I appreciate your generosity to have me on your show. And I love the talk with you today. Thank you.
And everyone out there, please take care of yourself. Dr. Poulter, why should people take care of themselves?
Because you matter.